Hello, everyone. It's Matthew McKenzie here again. Carer, activist, carer champion, whatever you can call me regarding carers, that's what I tend to promote on. And sometimes I'll stray. Yeah, I'll focus on unpaid carers and those who care for someone with mental ill health or cancer. And I'll stray sometimes onto topics regarding psychiatry, psychology. Obviously, again, the impact on carers. But this time, I want to focus on something that unfortunately will happen to all of us, as you can see from the title, coping after the loss of a loved one. But what tends to happen for unpaid carers, and I'm talking about those who are caring for a relative or a friend, that type of thing, not someone who's paid to do it, is when you really pour all your resources and energy into caring for someone with long-term illness and they pass on, it really hits hard. It's not just, you kept in touch with them over Christmas and that's it. I'm talking about those who spent, you know, most of their lives, I suppose, or for a bit of their life, really sacrificing all they've got to care for someone, and the cared for or the care recipient has passed on, possibly due to their long-term illness. And I felt because I did a campaign, and I'll speak about this in a bit, regarding National Grief Awareness Week, I felt it was due time to delve into the subject matter regarding carers. That's what I stand for. So this lecture will be on ways aimed at carers and professionals, I guess, on ways to cope when someone that you've cared for has passed on. So I don't know, again, if you saw my other video, the one I did previously, raising awareness of National Grief Awareness Week. And this was put together by the Good Grief Trust. I've known them for many years, to be honest. And they do great work. Tomorrow actually is the last day of National Grief Awareness Week 2024. And to wrap this up, I felt I should do a lecture on this topic. The video that I did to help campaign was just 2 minutes long. This is obviously a lecture, so it's going to be a lot longer, but quite important. And some of the things I've mentioned here can apply to anyone. You don't really have to be caring for someone and, the inevitable happens. This can be useful for anyone. But let's continue. What shall we cover in this lecture? And I think it was 9 points, but let's have a look. So basically, we're going to start with, how and why it's so important to acknowledge your grief. You can't ignore it. That's the worst thing to do. Two, we'll delve into looking out for emotional support, uh, things you can try, which is, ways of creating a ritual or farewell. It helps with closure. Although personally, I think grief is not, and this is a really important point, it's not going to be the same for everyone. People cope with grief in different ways. So it's not like a silver bullet, if you know what I mean, where it just solves situations. But these are like guides and standards people or carers can use, to be honest. I think it's also, we'll cover addressing guilt and what helps in relief regarding that guilt, rebuilding your identity. And the reason I thought to put that one in is because obviously you, as a carer, that was your identity. So when someone's gone and you've poured all your resources and that your identity was the carer, then what is your identity? And this is where the psychology comes into it, to be honest, because when it comes to psychology and that type of thing, it's always about the mind. And, don't get me wrong, identity is very important when it comes to taking the next step on your purpose in life. We'll move on to taking care of your well-being, that either being physical, emotional well-being, The big reason to include that, obviously, is if grief does overcome you, people tend to not take care of themselves, and this could even lead to forms of depression. They just won't eat or won't wash it. It's different for each person coping with grief. So that's why I decided to look into that one. Reflecting and celebrating their life. It's not about focusing on the way that they've passed. The person that you're looking after, yes, they had long-term illness. Yes, they may have the mental illness. This is, again, something I focus a lot on. It's not just the moment of passing, it's looking back at their life, because there are more than their illness, if you know what I mean. We'll look into that. And again, a more in look into finding purpose after caregiving. And then the last one will be being patient with yourself. And I think that's probably the most important one, to be honest. So let's start reaching out if you struggle. Yeah, that's completely forgot. If all these points do not work, it's always good to reach out for professional help. I mean, I won't have a habit of talking about stuff before I hit the thing, but that's what I'm going to be focusing on when that happens. And for some people, that will happen. It's always good to try these points, obviously, but we do, things can be difficult, and it's always good not to delay things and reach out for professional help. But we'll touch on that subject. So let's start. So what happens in regards to acknowledging your grief and why? Well, the first thing is it's a natural process, really. Never be ashamed to grieve. And I know this is a big problem I'm not ashamed to say this one. Men tend not to do this. And you can see here, it's important to let yourself feel sadness, anger, even relief. And when it comes to relief, I don't think you should feel guilty about feeling relief. Because the person that you cared for has suffered a lot during their life. And when it came to the moment of the passing, the suffering was immense. So you might sort of see this as a way of, they're not suffering anymore. There are many other reasons on, why someone would want to feel that sadness, want to feel that anger. The emotions, they've got to come out. And again, back in psychology, if they don't come out, they're going to come out in other ways. The key word here is not to delay on these things. They've got to come out. So it's acknowledging, those feelings and allowing them to happen. Obviously, there's got to be a limit. Not easy, obviously, because I think the grieving process is like being on the top of a hill. It's more intense at the top of the hill, but over the years, it may decline. You may just find yourself walking down that hill. That's how I see it. But the hill or the mountain is different for each person. But acknowledging your grief, acknowledging those emotions, is a good start. The problem is when you don't acknowledge them. I did mention with men, they tend not to. They tend to bottle it up, and I don't think that's very helpful. So understanding that unique grief as a carer, you might grieve not only for the person, but also for that caregiving role, your identity, and the routine that gave you your identity, your life structure. So it's not just the passing of that one person that you cared for, it's the passing of your role. It's unique to what you've done, because you've really poured all you can, all your resources, your sacrifices, into making sure that person has a better quality of life that you cared for. So it's that unique form of grief. We move on to also to seek that emotional support. And yes, there are other forms of support. We'll get to that. But the emotional support, if you need, you might not, but the option is there. So the best and most easiest thing really is really to talk to someone. Share your feelings with friends, family, or support group. If you've registered as a carer at your local carer centre, they should have emotional support forms of therapy. Not all of them have it. It's quite a resource thing. Getting your GP might be useful. Obviously, when sharing your feelings with friends and family, be choosy. You can't, it's a shame, and I will cover this in another lecture. There are situations where friends just don't understand, or they don't have the time, or they don't want to be around those who are grieving, might find it a bit uncomfortable. So be choosy on that one. Grief counselling. I know some NHS trusts, mental health trusts, actually provide that, especially mental health trusts in the business of doing it. So they will offer it. I was offered when my mother passed and I was caring for her, I was offered grief counselling. Certainly do take it up. I didn't take it up at the time, but people grieve in different ways and cope in different ways. Do use it if you feel you need it. Professional counselling can provide tools to process those emotions, and no one can really prepare you for this. Even what I'm saying now might be a start, but obviously when it comes to that time, um, it is going to be a unique experience, but very important. It is part of life, especially if you've really cared for someone. And I've mentioned regarding those care centres, there actually are specific support groups. It doesn't have to be at the care centres. You can join groups for former carers who understand your unique experience of loss. Remember what I've said before. There's some people that don't get it. There's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of misunderstanding. The carer role is hidden. Because of that, people sort of guess and have biases about it, and they sort of say, "Ah, well, I've been through it. You could no near suffered as the person who suffered from mental ill health." Well, yeah, in a way, yeah, but they've gone now, and so who's left suffering? And that's just the start. So that's what I'm saying. Be choosy. The sad thing is that when caring for someone and they've passed on, people will still say funny things. They just don't understand. So you have to be really choosy, because the wrong word said to someone that's grieving can really tip them over the edge. It's a sad situation. That's why I'm trying to sort of point these things out, so you at least keep them in the back of your mind to prepare for it. There are those that just don't understand. So that's why it's important to join those groups, former carers, who can, and I should have put that in bold, understand your unique experience of loss. Remember, this is a double loss, not just of the loved ones you've lost, but your own identity, your own role regarding caring. And it's very complex. And I'll finish, just one last point. There will be other carers out there that you have to be aware. They may say funny things as well. We're not all close knit as I think. There's some carers that say, well, it's your fault that your loved ones passed away. You should have cared for them properly. So, ignore them. Um, Again, it's a sad situation. Um, but as I'm saying, the reason again why I'm pointing these things out is to try and prepare yourselves for these things. Grief is highly personal, almost secret situation, but it's important to get that support. So let's continue. So creating a ritual and a farewell. This is offers some form of closure, not completely, but attending those memorial services, participate in a funeral or memorial service as a way to honor your loved one's life. It's just because they've gone doesn't mean that's it, case closed. There are going to be important rituals that complete, in some sense, not fully, the important stage of being human. And in this sort of thing, it's that ritual. It's a sort of saying goodbye and being part of that ritual as well. It doesn't have to be just a memorial service. Creating personal rituals, and this is something I do quite often, especially on the date of my loved one's birth, the date on the passing. Lighting a candle, planting a tree, writing a letter to the person you cared for to express your thoughts and feelings. Um, Obviously, it's going to be different for each person, but these are very important things in the way that you're creating a ritual. I'm not saying you got to do it every day, but it's a way of having that connection. It's a way of coping when you've lost a loved one that you've cared for. Now, now that you've actually come to, I won't say come to terms, but acknowledged your forms of guilt and relief, it's time to address it. You know what those emotions are. So acknowledging those mixed emotions, it's common, really, and I've always said this, it's common, it's a human trait to feel relief that the person is no longer suffering. And I've mentioned this at the start of the lecture, as well as guilt for feeling that relief. Do accept those feelings that they're part of the grieving process. The key word here is that it's not selfish to do so. You've poured a huge amount in regards to caring for your loved one. It could have been the cancer, it could have been mental ill health has now affected the physical health. It could have been all those types of things. And it could have been a long period that you've been caring for them, and you've been there, you've joined them on that journey. So there's no you know there's no need for you to punish yourself in feeling that relief that they're no longer suffering. Is part of that grieving process. Also focusing on your efforts, remind yourself of the care and love that you provided during their life. It's not like you didn't do anything. You've done the best that you can. You've shared that journey with them. So remember, the key word here is not to punish yourself. You've done the best that you can, and it's a form of addressing that guilt and relief. Continue on, rebuilding your identity. This is going to be one of the most toughest one, because you will be battling, throughout your life, regarding this. So the form, it's basically redefining yourself. Caregiving can become a significant part of your identity, and sometimes, in some sense, I don't think it fully goes away. Whatever we've learned in caring for someone, we sort of take that and continue it on into caring for the community, supporting other carers, um, seeing seeing things differently. So it's basically taking time to rediscover who you are outside this role. And it could be that you might move on from the role. You might rebuild your identity in other ways. For me, I've learned a huge amount. I still find some form of support and the care, but there are other ways that I can take what I've learned throughout, being human and being a caring person, to promote the importance of caring. And it's an important role in the community. A caring community can go far. This again, don't feel guilty about this one. When you're rebuilding your identity, this can lead on to reclaiming what you've lost during that caring role, or what has been difficult to do. Obviously, time for yourself with the hobbies. So you now can revisit those activities or interests you may have put on hold while caregiving. Another big thing I've failed to mention is that if you're doing those hobbies, it can actually lessen the impact of that grief as well, because you're doing something, you're getting out there, whether it's jogging, painting, um, visiting places. It's time to reclaim that identity. It's time to, I'm not saying move on. I don't think that's the best way of putting it, but more like pouring focus on other things that can help you in coping as well. Again, this can be tricky, but it can get better with time. Not always. As I said, it's different for each person. But learning to take care of your physical and emotional well-being. The tragedy is if you don't, it can lead to obviously uh, loss of your physical health and emotional health. That's the double tragedy. You've lost one person. Why should it be that you lose yourself? Do you see what I mean? You don't want that double tragedy. So rest and recharge. Caregiving can be physically and emotionally exhausting. You now have the time, and you've got to now use it to prioritize self-care. So it's important to care not just for others, but for yourself as well during this difficult period. Staying active. I didn't mention the walking, and it doesn't have to be jogging. It can be like light exercise to start off well, as mentioned, as I put here, walking. And it's a way to reduce the stress and improve your mood. and the healthy routines, eating well, sleeping well, avoiding those numb of what I've said before. Don't numb those emotions, especially through there's a word I've forgotten, it's gone off my head now, but it's actually excessive alcohol and substance misuse, which can be common because those emotions are raw, they're painful. Obviously, there are those out there that will decide to find ways of numbing them, but the problem is, all right, you numb them, but you're going to cause other issues as well, addiction, obviously. So we don't really want that. What we want is what's best for yourself, and think of what your loved one would say. That I don't think they would want you to suffer. There's no doubt about it. Those emotions that you will feel are going to be raw. They're going to be hard. Um, but with these steps, it will help. Things will get better. That's the way we got to see things. Let's continue on. So reflect and celebrate your loved one's life. So it's not just about the moment of passing. It's about creating that memory project. Just because they've gone physically, there are the photos that lie around, the videos celebrating those moments of joy, um, stories and scrapbook or digital albums you can just look through. It's about their life, and you're honoring that, and it's obviously a way to cope. It's celebrating their life, and I still do this. I've actually got a website regarding my mum and the pictures I put in there, and I often light a candle. Um, tell their story with me. I've done that through the books I write. Yeah, I do that a lot about my caring journey, but it's also adding their story, sharing that memory with others who knew and loved them. So telling their story, you don't have to do that, but it's another way of reflecting on your loved one's life. I've mentioned this, what I tend to do regarding the identity, how that's changed from that full-on caring role. You've learned a lot. You've learned how to be a caring person. So, why not give back in other ways? Honor their memory by supporting the causes they cared for, or that they volunteering in their name. So, an example, my mum used to buy the animal, I think it's the country file from the BBC as a way to donate to animals. So it's a country file calendar, and I do this each year. I buy a calendar and stick it on the wall, and it's always there. It reminds me that, oh yeah, my mum used to get those calendars, and I feel happy doing that because that's what she always wanted. So finding that purpose after caregiving. So again, it's repeat really. Former carers can find meaning in supporting others. Through volunteering work or advocacy for care. Exactly what I do, and I've been doing that for many years. Setting new goals, sometimes we get stuck. So sometimes it's always good to list, what can bring new purpose in your life. And this is going to be controversial, really, what I'm going to say. When your caring role does come to an end, it can be a difficult situation to really find ways getting back into work. So that's why I've mentioned education is one of the first things. I do hope that, there's been a little bit of time for you to delve into education when you're in that caring role, but it's very difficult. So your caring role has come to an end, means of support will go. So it's really important to start looking at getting back into that education, that skills work, and getting some work. You might even have ways to travel or experiences. But again, this is another different lecture, to be honest, about, getting back and developing those skill sets. People think just because they're caring, they feel that they don't have any skills for future work. That's entirely wrong. Again, I shouldn't deviate into that topic now. I'll cover it elsewhere, but I think it's really important regarding that purpose after caregiving. So we're getting close to the end. I think this is the most toughest one, being patient with yourself. The carers do go through a lot of trauma. I do go through a fair bit. It's not easy. And one of the forms of trauma is obviously observing the suffering of your loved one. You're sort of trying to care for them. But all this takes patience. This takes time. Healing doesn't follow a timeline, and I've always said this time and time again. It's going to be different for each person. It's okay to move through that process at your own pace, and it's about the small steps, really. It's about recognizing that progress, being patient with yourself, rewarding yourself when you move on slightly with the joy and the calm, even if they seem far away at first. And the last which I've nearly forgotten to mention was to reach out if you do struggle. All those steps I've mentioned, yes, they can be done, but yes, there's some forms of grief that's so overwhelming. You've tried your best, and it's now time to say, look, I've got to now reach out. So it's always good to seek that professional help if the grief becomes overwhelming or leads to prolonged depression, anxiety, or isolation. So do reach out to counselors or therapists. There are hotlines and support. So do again contact grief support organizations or caregiver charities in your area. Don't hide it. Do not avoid those emotions in a sense, that you've got to acknowledge them and say that you do need that help. Because as I mentioned, if you don't acknowledge them, this is what will happen. The depression, the anxiety, it just becomes overwhelming. It becomes more chronic. And caring for someone is an act of love. And the loss of that person can leave a deep mark, forever, to be honest. By giving yourself space to grieve and seeking support, you will eventually find new meaning, and it can navigate for that journey of healing. And something I will revisit. This is not going to be the only lecture regarding these things. It's a very complex and difficult topic. So basically, with the ending of this, and the work the Good Grief Trust does, caring for someone is an act of love. And I've accidentally put this in twice actually, but I just wanted to finish this off as the conclusion. It will be different for each person, to be honest. There is no, and this is a sad thing, there is no completely clear structure regarding how to cope with grief, but it's a start. You've got to start from somewhere. So I'd like to say, you know, thanks for looking at this video. If you feel it's useful, do leave a like. I'll try and do more lectures and try not to make the mistake of rushing all this stuff in, because that's what's happened. But I felt it was so important to cover, because this is going to happen, at least to most of us. If you're caring for someone, um, yeah, it's going to hit you hard. It's not like you've just sort of spent not much time with the person. You've been there nearly every day, and you've really poured your heart out, your resources, all you can do. So I'll end this lecture by stating, just, look after yourself, whether you're caring or you're not, or you're grieving. That's what the message I want to leave behind. And I'll see you next time, in regards to my other videos or lectures that I do regarding unpaid carers. Thanks for dropping by.